June 6, 1944. What if I told you the soldiers you've been taught to overlook were the ones crawling through blood, smoke, and something far worse than death itself, holding shattered bodies together while bullets stitched the air around them? Would you still believe everything you've heard about French military history, or would it shake you a little? Because here's the thing nobody tells you. While the world loves to debate victories and defeats, there were French medics, stretcher bearers, and frontline soldiers fighting in ways that didn't make headlines, in moments so raw and terrifying they felt almost unreal, like something pulled straight out of a nightmare. And yeah, we're going there today, straight into the mud, the screams, and the silence that follows when everything goes wrong. Picture this: Normandy, D-Day, chaos everywhere. American and Allied troops storming the beaches. Machine gun fire tearing through waves of men. But right there among them were Free French forces. Smaller in number, but not in courage. And behind the rifles and grenades were medics. Guys who didn't get to shoot back much. Their job was worse, way worse. They had to run toward the screaming, toward the shattered limbs, toward the kind of injuries that stick in your head forever. And one medic later recalled dragging a soldier whose legs were barely attached, while the man kept whispering, "Don't let me die here," over and over, like a broken record. And here's the chilling part. The medic said the beach was so loud, so violent, that sometimes he couldn't even tell if the man was still alive or if it was just his voice echoing in his own head. That's the kind of psychological horror nobody talks about. And if you think that was the worst of it, nah, not even close. Because in the dense forests during later campaigns, especially in places like Alsace in late 1944, French units found themselves fighting in freezing conditions. Snow soaking into uniforms, fingers going numb, and medics working with hands that could barely move, trying to stop bleeding with whatever they had. Sometimes using torn cloth, sometimes just pressure and prayer. And there's this one account, man, it hits different. A wounded soldier lying in the snow at night, unable to move, hearing footsteps around him, thinking rescue had come, but when he looked up, he realized it wasn't his unit. It was enemy patrols moving through the darkness, and he had to play dead, holding his breath while blood froze around him, listening to voices he couldn't understand, waiting for a shot that never came. And later, when a medic finally reached him hours later, the guy was still alive but barely speaking, just staring, like he'd seen something he couldn't explain. And that's the side of war that doesn't fit into neat history books. The part where fear becomes something physical, something that sits on your chest and doesn't let go. And yeah, people love to joke about French military history, waving white flags and all that nonsense. But those jokes don't survive 5 minutes in these stories. Because courage isn't always about charging forward with a rifle. Sometimes it's about crawling through mud under fire just to keep one more person breathing. Sometimes it's about staying awake for 48 hours straight, because if you close your eyes, someone dies. And during World War I, French medics in places like Verdun were dealing with a kind of horror that almost feels unreal today. Trenches filled with water, rats everywhere, bodies decomposing just feet away from the living, and the wounded stuck in that environment for days. Not hours, days, waiting for help, and medics had to go out at night. Because daytime meant instant death, moving silently through trenches that were half collapsed, stepping over bodies they couldn't even identify anymore. And one story tells of a medic who reached a soldier calling for help, only to realize the voice was coming from someone already dead. The sound caused by trapped air escaping the lungs as the body shifted. Imagine hearing that in total darkness, already exhausted, already terrified, and still having to keep going like it's just another task, like it's normal. And that messes with your head in ways we can barely understand sitting here today. And fast forward to World War II again. The French resistance, not traditional soldiers, but fighters operating in the shadows, and when they got wounded, There were no proper hospitals, no safe zones. Medics had to treat injuries in basements, barns, even caves with limited supplies. Sometimes no anesthesia, just holding someone down while removing shrapnel. And the screams had to be muffled because one wrong sound could bring enemy forces crashing in. And there's a recorded incident where a hidden medical post was discovered. Not because of noise, but because of the smell. Yeah. The smell of infection and blood gave them away, and what followed was brutal. No time to evacuate, no time to hide, just chaos. And survivors later described that moment as something out of a horror story. Not just because of the violence, but because of the helplessness. The feeling that everything you fought to protect was about to vanish in seconds. And still, despite all that, these medics kept going, mission after mission, patching people up, sending them back out, knowing some wouldn't return, and that's the part that hits hardest. They weren't just saving lives, they were sending them back into danger, carrying that weight every single day. And if you think modern warfare changed things completely, think again, because even in later conflicts involving French forces, like in Indochina and Algeria, medics were again pushed to their limits. Dense jungles, extreme heat, ambushes out of nowhere. Helicopters sometimes unable to land, forcing medics to treat the wounded right there in the field. Surrounded by sounds that could mean anything: wind, animals, or enemy movement. And one veteran described a night where they set up a temporary aid station, only to realize the ground beneath them was still warm from recent fighting, and as they worked, they kept hearing faint noises like whispers, but couldn't tell if it was injured soldiers nearby or just their own minds breaking under pressure. And that's the psychological edge of war, where reality starts to blur, where exhaustion and fear create something almost supernatural. And yeah, you might be thinking, why don't we hear more about this? Why is this side of French military history barely talked about? And honestly, it's because these stories don't fit the usual narrative. They're messy, emotional, uncomfortable. They don't glorify war, they expose it. They show the cost in a way that's hard to package into simple headlines, but that's exactly why they matter. Because behind every major battle, every strategic decision, there were individuals living through moments that felt endless, terrifying, and sometimes downright unreal. And if you've made it this far, I want you to think about this. When history gets simplified into wins and losses, who gets forgotten? The ones pulling triggers, or the ones holding everything together when it falls apart? And more importantly, what does that say about the stories we choose to remember? Drop your thoughts, because this one deserves a real conversation, not just another scroll past the truth.